Hey, what's going on YouTube? I want to give you guys a long-term review on the Santa Cruz Megatower. I've had this bike for pretty much a full season now and, ridden maybe 700-800 miles. I got a couple bikes, so this doesn't get the full ride time, but I've had quite a bit of time on it this season. So, there's a lot of reviews out there, but I feel like after getting a full season on it, you can really start to get into the nitty gritty of like the good and the bad. So I'm going to go over that with you guys. And I'm going to start with the things that I like about the bike. So first thing is the frame quality. That ranges from paint to bearings to linkage to just the swap box. Like, the quality and finish is really good. It's easy to service the bearings, which I did once. The paint has really not chipped anywhere, which is really nice after like a full season. So just the overall build quality is great. And another thing with that is the tolerance of the rear end. So like if I try to flex this wheel like kind of this way and I grab the frame and it was on the ground and I really give it a tug, the wheel just really does not, like in the rear end, the bearings, you can just tell the tolerances are really good, and it just gives you this kind of confidence. I've got other bikes where they have more flex back there, and I know that's not everything. In some instances that can be a good thing, but in this frame, there's not a lot of it, and I think the ride quality is incredible. It's just a very damped, hard charging, inspiring ride feel, confidence inspiring ride feel. Some bikes I've had, you can feel feedback from the trail kind of going up through your feet and into your legs after a rough descent or a long descent, and this bike just doesn't do that. Like, I can ride it all day at the bike park. I can do, just 5 minutes of as fast as I can down the hill, and really my feet and legs are less tired than they are on some of the other bikes I've owned. Most recently the Stump Jumper Evo, I just felt like that bike transmitted a lot of the trail back up to my feet. Some people like that. It gives it a sporty feel. But if you are riding hard all day or over the chunkiest stuff you can find, I much prefer the damped feel, and the stiff. It's like a combination of stiff and damped that have not quite experienced before. I thought the Ripmo actually did a pretty decent job of that, where my feet didn't really feel like they got tired on rough descents, but this bike just takes that to another level. That's another pro. The pedal efficiency is amazing. The kinematics in general. I will say that the coil shock runs better on this bike, I think, because of the progression. The air shock, and I guess better is relative. The coil shock feels more plush and planted, but it absorbs the rough stuff a little bit better, and I think it has to do with that 29% frame progression, whereas the air shock, it's sportier and livelier and pedals a little bit better. But I don't really think that, I think this bike was more intended to run with a coil shock. That, I don't know, not a good or a bad thing necessarily. I will say on the X2, the Float X2, which I have right here, Santa Cruz did nail that tune. Like, it does pedal amazing. And like, if you're trying to race this bike, I think that's probably the faster of the two options. You're going to feel more, but you can really pick up the bike and put it wherever you want, and really good pedal efficiency and poppy. And, I think overall that probably would transmit, if you're doing an enduro race, to a little bit faster time would be my guess. But if you're doing the bike park and stuff, both shocks are great options, but I think the DHX2 gives that bike a little bit more plush feeling. I think this bike got a little bit panned on the Pink Bike reviews they said the rear end felt, chattery or kind of harsh. And I don't know. I didn't really get that with either shock, but I do think with the Coil shock, there's no way you can say that. It feels extremely plush. So with the air shock, it's just sportier. So I think that's everything for the pros. The seat tube angle and the pedaling position, that's another thing that kind of goes in with the really good pedal efficiency kinematics, is that the seat tube and your pedaling position, like they all play together to where this bike just pedals really well. Like I didn't mind pedaling it on really long rides. The only thing is the weight. You do feel the weight. The frame is not a light frame. It's like heavier than some alloy frames. Like I think the Canfield, whatever their enduro bike is, the lithium, this bike's like the same weight as that, if not heavier. And I know it's not quite apples to apples because you've got the down tube storage with this bike. And my guess is this frame is probably significantly stiffer and has a better ride feel to it, but it is heavy. So something to think about if you're going to buy this bike. And this is the CC version. I did kind of a custom build. Custom. It's just a Shimano build, but I built it up, frame only. So yeah, I mean, overall, great. A lot of pros to this bike. So on to the cons. This bike is really long. I am 6 feet tall. I weigh 175 pounds. This bike, it has a 1266 wheelbase, and yeah, it's just really long. It's great at the bike park. But when you are doing like aggressive trail riding, steep trails, if it's like a steep trail with a tight turn, this is not the easiest bike to get around that stuff. And if you like doing really aggressive stuff, like I think you know what I'm talking about in terms of like steep, tight trails, this thing is long. So, I think the guy, like the EWS rider that rides this bike, Iago Gare, he sizes down and he's like, I don't know, 5'11" or 5'10" or something like that. And I think it makes sense because the wheelbase on this bike is just long. And it's, once you ride it for a while, and I don't want to, like, I got along with this bike really well, and I think I got used to it pretty quickly. But even after having it for a season, there's still this like mental check of like having to move my body weight more on the bike than I've had to do with any other bike. And it has nothing to do with the size of the travel. It totally has to do with the length of the wheelbase, where like I've got to actively push my weight forward on the bike. It's kind of hard to describe unless you've done it, but I've had other bikes with 64 degree head angles, 64.5 degree head angles. And, I don't know if it's necessarily even the head angle. I think it's like the head angle in conjunction with just the length. But yeah, it's like you really do have to think about where your body weight is. And, it can be a little bit cumbersome on tight corners. So when it's straight out, rough and steep, and there's no tight turns, this bike's amazing. I mean, it's kind of like a downhill bike in that regard. And I think the geometry is very similar to a downhill bike, from not that long ago with the length of the wheelbase and everything. So something to think about. If you're going to buy this bike, I think, hopefully you already know what you're doing, and you're probably spending a lot of days in the bike park, or you live in like the gnarliest of the gnarliest places. I live on the Front Range, and this was definitely overbiking, but we also hit some of the bike parks, and it's really fun to have there. Like if I was only riding bike park, I would 100%, this is the perfect bike. But if you want this thing to ride park and do a lot of trail riding, like, yes, it's really efficient, but think about the wheelbase. I would suggest if you're on the cusp of sizes, 100% sizing down with this bike. I'd be curious to try a medium. I think the reach would feel really short, but the wheelbase, and like actual enduro riding would probably feel better. But, it also depends on where you ride and, how flat out it is. I think North America is known for having a lot of, straight out stuff. So, maybe it depends on where you live, like somewhere in California or something. But anyway, that was one of the biggest things that I guess I didn't quite fully appreciate going into buying this bike was the length. Other issues are this guy. So this is the second time I've just gotten it back from Fox. It made it like 1 week after I got it back the first time. Before that, I think I did get a decent amount of riding in, maybe 2 good months, and then it started to get cavitation. Then when I sent it in, got it back, it made it like literally a week and it cavitated again. So I just got it back again. And yeah, so that was kind of a pain, but the shock tune's freaking amazing. Like, you can use Santa Cruz recommended settings right off the bat and you're pretty much good to go on this shock. On this shock, not so much. So I had it tuned to Santa Cruz recommendations and I really struggle with the rebound. So I'm running a 500-pound spring, which is what Santa Cruz recommended. I even emailed them because I thought it sounded high, and they were like, nope, if you're 175, go to the 500. I ended up buying a 475 and a 500. It didn't really matter. They felt very similar, and they were both very fast. So I've got rebound damping almost all the way in, and it's still really fast. I called the shop that tuned it for me, and they were like, we definitely got the shims in right. Like, the tune is correct. It's just fast. A lot of people think fast is great. I agree to an extent, but like that range that you would want and the ability to adjust for the tune isn't there in my opinion. So if you buy DHX2, I probably would try running it before paying to have it tuned to Santa Cruz spec. I don't know. I just didn't get along with that tune very well. And I got along with that tune great. And I run that shock at exactly what they tell me to run it at. And I really haven't changed much. I think I opened up high-speed compression. I open it up sometimes depending on what I'm doing, a click or close it back. But I mean, it's almost nailed on what they recommend. So maybe add a little bit of low-speed compression if you want to pedal it all day. But I mean, yeah, so that both shocks had like an issue, which kind of sucks. Not really knocking Fox. I think Fox stuff is pretty great, but yeah, just, well, I don't know. Actually, the X2 blowing up twice, that they got to work on that. But the fork's great. The coil shock is great. But yeah, so those are probably the two biggest nitpicks I had with this bike. I'm trying to think of anything else. I think I mentioned the weight already. It's a fairly heavy bike, so really got to be riding enduro. I think it weighs like 37 pounds right here. I've gotten it down to sub 36, but yeah, it's, you're not going to have a lightweight rocket ship by any means. So yeah, I think that covers most of it. I am going to try a little bit shorter bike this season. If they had just, I don't know, if there was a way to have this bike with a slightly shorter wheelbase and not have to drop to a medium with a 450 reach, I think it'd be the perfect bike for me. But I think in the current setup, it's just a little bit too long, and I want to go back to something where I'm not really thinking about my body positioning all the time, and where it's kind of just in the back of my mind, which I thought would have happened after a season of riding, but still every now and then I find myself thinking about, kind of actively weighting the front, just because I think the long wheelbase. So yeah, if you have any questions, hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to leave a comment or message me or whatever, and I'll be happy to try to help you out. But those are my thoughts on the bike. Overall, I would absolutely recommend this bike for the right person. I think the frame quality is fantastic, and they really did a good job for kind of what this bike is. I think it's probably more bike than it's definitely more bike than most people need. So really make sure you're doing bike park or you're riding the most aggressive stuff before you buy this bike. But yeah, that's kind of it. So thanks for watching, and yeah, shoot me a note if you guys have any questions. Thanks.